livelihood. But we are coming for you and your rotten system. And each and every person who participated in today's demonstration should feel a sense of pride that they did not sit idly by while these historic opportunities to demand the change that's needed passed us by. And in International Socialist Alternative, we can also feel proud of the small part that we played in helping to mobilise for today's event, bringing people not just from Scotland, from Wales and from England, but from around Europe and around the world. But we did not call tonight's rally to congratulate ourselves on a job well done. We called tonight's rally to prepare ourselves for the immense tasks that lie before working class and young people, to raise the ideas that we believe are necessary for our movement to organise, and to invite all of those who are here with us this evening to join us in that fight. To put it very starkly, to save the world, we have to change the world. It's a well-known and cliched statistic that 100 companies worldwide, massive monopolies, are responsible for an estimated 70% of global emissions. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, has an entire plan for net zero, so-called, which relies almost exclusively on asking the likes of those monopolies, big business, nicely, on toothless regulations and supplicant requests for investment in green technology and so on. Really, it's a license for big polluters to greenwash. And all of it dodges the fundamental truth, which is this: you can't control what you don't own. So long as the commanding heights of the economy are in private hands and are subject to the demands of the market and the law of profit, the Earth's ecosystem, its life support systems, will continue to be put in dire peril. So we need to build a movement to take the wealth off this tiny few, to expropriate these huge monopolies through nationalisation and workers' control, the democratic planning of the world's economy so that we can meet the needs of all of the 7 million inhabitants and at the same time protect and restore our environment. And we need to build this movement not just in one country, not just on one continent. We need to build it truly internationally, and we need to build it fast. How we do so? What must we demand? How can we win the support of the mass of working class people for our ideas? These are the questions which we hope to begin to answer at tonight's rally. So I will start by introducing our very first speaker. We start with one of the many millions of young climate activists who took to the streets in 2019 for the youth climate strike movement. Harissa led a strike in her school at that time. She's now a college student in Dublin. And as a young socialist and a member of the Socialist Party in Ireland, she was also instrumental in founding the Youth Against Racism and Inequality campaign, which gained national media attention after authoring a groundbreaking survey revealing the scale of police and state racism against people of colour in Ireland. So please give a very warm welcome to Harissa.
I'm going to take that clap as a clap to the over 100,000 activists who have stormed the streets of Glasgow over the past few days in the biggest climate protest that has ever taken place in Scotland. That is what that clap was for. Shown the iron will of young and working class people, which has been on full display. You only have to look at the school students who energetically spread the news of the climate strike in their school despite punishment. You only have to look at the worker activists who actually left their jobs because their tyrant bosses were so unwilling to give them 2 days off of work to attend the COP26 protest. This really shows that despite pressure from every corner, from governments chasing the most minimal demands, and media really uplifting their most minimal empty promises to try put us away and put us off from hitting the streets, to even nihilists telling us that there is no potential for us to make any real change on the climate crisis. The past few days have shown us that actually there is so much potential for determined and real hope. And actually, I think the protests over the past few days have really shown us that that the protests over the past few days have really shown us that that have actually made us forget about the big business leaders and their best friends in government who are sitting around talking, and let's actually not forget that they're actually dozing off in the middle of their proceedings as well, talking round and round in circles about how they're going to solve this crisis that they've created themselves. Because actually, you forget about these big business leaders when you're at these protests, because you realize that it's actually indeed rallying spaces that we have the potential to demand and win the real radical change necessary. Spaces like this that really point the way forward. The language of the ruling class is only the language of empty politics because they are tied to the ruthless pursuit of profit at the expense of any and all human or environmental costs. Because why would they take the climate crisis seriously when to them nature is nothing but an infinite pit of resources to reign over and destroy? In their game of churning out more and more profits, churning out billions and soon to be trillions of dollars worth of profit to compete on the market to try win each other out in big business and in interim period bubbling rivalries that we're seeing now as well. So why would a company like Amazon ever, stop investing in sweatshop labor or create or become fossil fuel free production when instead they can use the dirtiest resources possible, where they can overproduce en masse and force their workers to work till they drop? This is way more profitable for Jeff Bezos, so of course this is what Amazon is going to pursue. And it's becoming exceptionally clear to us now that profit means nothing but exploitation. Their profits mean nothing but the exploitation of us workers and our environment. But as corporations literally dig our graves on oil rigs now, they're also creating their own grave diggers, right? In the angry layers of all the exploited and oppressed across the world who won't stand by and silently watch our livelihoods burn. In a crisis as deep and ever spiraling as the climate crisis, and especially the fears of rising numbers represent itself more and more in the stark reality of natural disasters in our everyday lives. Fight back is absolutely inevitable, right? It is inevitable. But as the revolutionary Black liberation activist Malcolm X said, in this crisis, we are not outnumbered, we are outorganized. And in the context of COP26, this means talking about next steps. It means building the most powerful movement possible with the vision of not only rallying for the climate, but really remembering that we cannot fight fire with fire. This year's Sea report found that none of the world's most major industrial industries would be profitable if they had to pay for the environmental cost of their activities, right? So what is the conclusion we draw from this? It means that we cannot trust the big business, we cannot trust their friendly government, but really it is those who have no interest in profit that have the real role to play. The role where our allies are only in all of the oppressed and exploited of the world to come together with the necessary demands that really demand that the control be taken back into our own hands. The climate movement the climate crisis is only a symptom of the larger crisis of inequality and exploitation under capitalism. But let us remember that this is a system that has only existed for 250 years. It is a system that is not inevitable. continue ravaging the planet if we have the small and mighty force necessary to combat it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Harita for a brilliant start to tonight's rally. Our next speaker has travelled a long way to be here. A student from São Paulo in Brazil, studying biology and a member of LSR, Liberty, Socialism and Revolution, or if you can speak Portuguese, if I can't, Liberdade, Socialismo or Revolução. Perhaps I need a little practice. She is active in the environmental movement in Brazil in helping to organise the climate strike and in participating in actions defending indigenous lands and fighting against the Bolsonaro government, which of course, as we all know, is a terrible government, and Bolsonaro himself is an outspoken enemy of the environment. So please welcome Anna.
Boa noite, camaradas, todas as pessoas convidadas aqui hoje.
Good evening, comrades and everyone invited here today.
No Brasil, hoje estamos vivendo uma grave crise econômica, política e social.
In Brazil today, we have a very bad economic, social, and political crisis.
O desmatamento da Amazônia, os nossos biomas estão sendo queimados, vivemos a pior seca em 90 anos, e voltamos ao mapa da fome, e tudo isso é pior no governo do Bolsonaro, que é produto do sistema capitalista.
We have the burning of the Amazon, we have the burning of the destruction of the Amazon, burning of all the ecosystems. We have the worst drought in Brazil for more than 90 years. There's a situation of starvation, mass starvation has returned to the country, and all these problems are made worse by Bolsonaro, this government that is a product of the problems of the system.
Bolsonaro é negacionista, é contra a ciência e se mostrou incompetente para governar.
So Bolsonaro was a negationist, he denies climate change, he's against science, and he's shown himself to be incompetent to run the country.
Seu governo e sua família estão envolvidos com escândalos e corrupções políticas no Brasil.
This government that's dominated by his family is involved in countless corruption scandals.
Em suas falas públicas, ele diz que não é problema dele as pessoas que foram levadas pela Covid-19.
In his speeches, he says that all the people who died from COVID-19 in Brazil is not his problem.
E a nossa luta e a nossa revolta de hoje e de amanhã é por todos aqueles e aquelas que se foram por não ter acesso à vacina. São direitos de todos.
But the struggles and the anger that we feel today, struggles that we carry out today, they're all for those people who've lost their lives as a result of COVID and the lack of vaccines being available to them.
Esse governo representa uma política genocida, onde o Brasil é o segundo país com mais mortes de pessoas pela Covid-19.
So this government's got a policy of genocide. It's the country with the second most deaths of COVID-19.
Mas essa pandemia e esse governo só pioraram a situação que já estava ruim.
But this government has just made a situation worse, which is already bad.
Os nossos problemas vão além de Bolsonaro. Porque temos que combater o sistema que o criou.
Our problems go beyond Bolsonaro. What we have to do is fight the system that produced Bolsonaro.
Porque ele é resultado da crise do sistema capitalista, um sistema que destrói tudo para lutar.
He's a product of capitalism, a system that destroys everything for profit.
O Brasil é o país que tem mais água doce no mundo, com 12% do total existente do planeta Terra.
So Brazil is the country with the most fresh water in the whole world. It's got 12% of all the fresh water that exists in the planet.
Os grandes rios que abastecem a população são do Cerrado, o bioma que sofre com a maior expansão do agronegócio.
And so most of this water comes from an ecosystem called Cerrado, which is the ecosystem that's most under attack by the agribusiness.
que desmata o seu entorno, tirando suas matas ciliares, que são importantes para que os rios não sequem no Brasil.
And so this agribusiness industry, it attacks forests and it eliminates forests that are really important for the storage of fresh water.
O desmatamento da Amazônia é o maior em 10 anos e isso está interferindo nas chuvas na região sudeste do país.
So the destruction of the Amazon is at the highest rate for more than 10 years, and it's already impacting on the amount of rainfall in the southeast of the country.
Isso se reflete na maior crise hídrica em 90 anos no estado de São Paulo.
And that's been reflected in the worst water crisis for more than 90 years in Sao Paulo.
Essa destruição em grande escala coloca em risco o futuro da maior cidade da América Latina.
But this water crisis actually is an existential threat to the biggest city in Latin America, Sao Paulo.
Essa crise hídrica faz com que milhares de pessoas paguem absurdos nas contas de energia.
And it also means that millions of people pay incredibly high prices in their energy bills.
Além disso, a falta de chuva afeta famílias que sobrevivem de plantio e de criações de animais.
And also the lack of rainfall, it impacts many poor families who depend for their livelihoods on growing their own food and raising their own animals, etc.
Isso é a causa de parte do aumento da fome no Brasil. E é contraditório, porque somos um dos maiores países que exportam comida no mundo.
So this drought is a big reason why hunger is increasing in Brazil. It's a totally contradictory situation. Brazil is also one of the countries that exports most food.
A fome no Brasil é preocupante. Voltamos ao mapa da fome em 2020. A insegurança alimentar retornaram aos patamares próximos ao ano de 2004.
So in 2020, Brazil returned to the so-called hunger map of the world, and the level of food insecurity is worse than it has been any time since 2004.
Junto a isso, há o aumento do preço da comida. Circulam vídeos onde pessoas estão pagando por ossos e restos de peles de animais para se alimentar e pegando restos de comida em caminhões de coleta de lixo no Brasil.
In that context, there's this wide circulation of videos of people who are totally desperate and they're going to places trying to buy leftover animal bones or leftover pieces of skin from animals, and they're searching in dustbins for food and so on.
São cenas que mostram o quanto o capitalismo é perverso.
And this shows just how perverse system capitalism is.
Sabemos que a política que o ministro da Economia, Paulo Guedes, aplica no Brasil não resolve nada como eles prometeram em suas eleições.
So the economic policy of the government and the finance minister, Paulo Guedes, doesn't resolve anything like they promised in the election.
E sim, o que eles estão fazendo é atacar e tirar os nossos direitos.
All it's doing is attacking us and taking our rights away.
A luta pela preservação do meio ambiente no Brasil passa pelas lutas dos povos indígenas, pela reforma agrária e urbana.
And so the struggle taking place against the destruction of the environment in Brazil today is mostly being waged through the struggle of indigenous people against so-called agrarian reform and against the policy of government.
A crise do meio ambiente é a fome que passamos hoje, a seca e o superaquecimento do planeta, que empurram as pessoas para situações que elas não têm escolha.
So the environmental crisis, the drought, also the overheating of the climate, it pushes people into a situation they have no choice.
O principal movimento ambiental no Brasil é a luta dos povos indígenas que estão na linha de frente na luta contra o governo Bolsonaro.
So this struggle of the indigenous people is in the front line of all the struggles against Bolsonaro today.
Em defesa de suas terras, da nossa biodiversidade e de suas culturas.
And it's in defense of land, of biodiversity, and of the culture of these people.
O governo e seus aliados querem aprovar uma lei para tirarem as terras dos povos indígenas e cederem a mineradores e outros interessados na destruição das nossas florestas.
So the government wants to pass a law that can take the land of indigenous people away, give it to mining companies and other multinational companies that have an interest in further exploiting the environment and destroying the Amazon.
Esse projeto fortaleceu a invasão de suas terras, seu garimpo ilegal, contaminação de seus rios e contaminação de suas comidas com mercúrio, onde muitos povos indígenas e crenças humanos estão morrendo todos os dias.
And so also this law by the government, what it does is it encourages another phenomenon, which is the illegal invasion of mining companies into indigenous people's territories. and that what that leads to is widespread contamination of food and water with mercury, which leads to the deaths of thousands of people.
Recentemente, 4 crianças do povo Yanomami foram afogadas por causa de uma máquina do garimpo ilegal.
Just recently, 4 children of the Yanomami people, they were drowned by a machine, a mining machine, that was part of this illegal invasion of territory.
Os povos indígenas sentem que precisamos salvar o planeta.
So indigenous people feel very deeply the need to save the planet.
Porque estão em contato direto com a natureza e sabem que todos os indígenas e não indígenas dependem da natureza para viver.
And they understand that because they're in very direct contact with the earth, and they understand that we depend on it to live.
A natureza não pode ser propriedade privada.
Nature can't be private property.
O povo tem que decidir o que tem que ser feito e não ficar na mão de pessoas que decidem usá-la para o seu próprio lucro.
People should decide how land is used, not people who just want profit.
Precisamos de políticas de enfrentamento com como estatizar empresas poluentes.
We need policies to confront these interests, like nationalizing polluting companies.
Não é suficiente promessas, onde os ricos têm que pagar. Não é suficiente promessas. Os ricos têm que pagar pela crise que eles mesmos criaram.
Just promises are not enough. The rich need to pay for the crisis they created.
A juventude está se radicalizando, não só por causa do futuro, porque hoje já vivemos em uma crise.
And the youth are radicalizing, not just because they see a bad future, but they already feel the crisis.
Por isso, hoje, estamos aqui para construir uma saída que realmente coloque o que é importante para salvar o nosso planeta.
And that's why we're here. We defend the way out, which really can save the planet.
A COP26 é um espaço que, por si só, não vai além de metas rasas, porque nesse capitalismo desenfreado não podemos continuar.
So the COP26, it doesn't go beyond these mere promises, because under capitalism, we can't challenge this crisis.
O planeta pede socorro e não temos tempo para a corte que interessa aos ricos.
So the planet is begging for help, and we have no more time to wait for the rich.
O capitalismo está matando o nosso planeta e não temos. O capitalismo está matando o nosso planeta e vamos lutar pela mudança socialista já.
So capitalism is killing our planet, and we need to fight for social change now.
Não há planeta B, demarcação já, Amazônia em pé.
There's no planet B. We need to stop deforestation. The Amazon needs to rise up.
Chega de derramar sangue indígena, nossas vidas importam.
Don't spill the blood of the indigenous, our lives matter.
Well, thank you so much to Anna for that incredibly important contribution to tonight's rally. Next up, we have a member of the Irish Parliament. But this is no ordinary politician who we are dealing with. Our next speaker is a decades-long campaigner against capitalism in Ireland. He was elected during campaigns against water charges, and he has used his seat to consistently campaign and elevate mass movements of working class people and young people. Some of you may have seen this speaker in the Irish Parliament denouncing the utter hypocrisy of the Irish political establishment and the capitalist class. He was accused by the Irish Prime Minister of using the issue of climate change to bring the capitalist system around the world and bring down the capitalist system around the world and take down the world order. Well, he can answer that charge for himself now.
If I was a big capitalist or a billionaire tonight, I would be more than a little bit nervous. And I would be more than a little bit nervous for 2 reasons. First of all, I would look at 100,000 people on the streets of Glasgow and I would ask myself the question, Has this climate movement peaked? And I think the answer would be no. And I would ask myself the question, has this climate movement come anywhere near peaking yet? And I would say probably not. But second of all, I would look at the young people in the demonstration. And I would think, is this a generation which increasingly now is putting the entire system into the dock and pointing an accusing finger at capitalism and the rule of profit? And is this a generation which is increasingly open to the ideas of socialism and a socialist alternative? And I would think probably yes. At the start of the COP, the clown Boris Johnson compared the situation facing world capitalism to the situation that once faced the Roman Empire. And, you know, these people are not completely stupid. If that's your analysis, you have to consider at least taking some steps to try and shore up the situation. And I think that along with the blah, 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 they have looked at some steps this week. The media will hail this as the most significant COP from their point of view since Paris in 2015. But the point is, the crux of it is, that even where they take some steps, they are at the very best, they're half measures. They're saying they're going to swear off coal. 40 countries have signed up to that. That's nearly what, one nation out of every 5. And some of them are saying we're going to do it in the 2040. And the others are saying we're going to do it in the 2040. Not even a half measure. They signed an agreement to say there'll be no more international finance for new fossil fuel extraction projects. How many nations signed up to? 19. Not even a quarter measure in that sense. Why? Because they're tied by 1,000 strings to the interest of profit, big oil, big gas, the banks, and so on. So a world run by billionaires and big corporations for profit with governments dancing to their tunes will not solve the problem. We're not the only people saying that. This might amaze some people here, but the third chapter of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change document, which is due to be released this spring, the first draft of that says that a sustainable planet is incompatible with the capitalist mode of production. That's a fact. And that was linked to the media by Extinction Rebellion Spain and by Scientist Rebellion. Why? Because they knew that when the politicians and the top civil servants sat around the table to do the next draft, that was going to be taken out. So they leaked it to the media. So what we're saying here is we need to end the system of capitalism. We need to replace it with a sustainable, democratic, socialist society, public ownership of the wealth, geared towards people and the environment, not profit. And we need to shut down all the dirty industries. But we need to reskill and retrain people and provide alternative jobs, unionized jobs with good pay in the green energy sector. Are we saying we have to wait for socialism? No, we're not saying that. We fight for things in the here and now. We fight for free public transport in Scotland, in Europe, throughout the entire world. We fight for a 4-day working week, 30, 32 hours as a maximum. No more fossil fuel extraction, green jobs through public investment at decent rates of pay. We fight for these reforms. We support reforms. We're the best fighters for reform, but we're opposed to reformism. The idea that you can reform a system owned and controlled by millionaires and billionaires, and that is the root of the problem. We fight for these things as a bridge, and we link them with the idea of getting rid of the system as a whole. Do we fight for that in parliaments and councils? Yes, we do. Where we have workers' representatives on a workers' wage, democratically accountable to you, democratically accountable to the movement, who will fight every bit as hard for our class, our people, and our interests as they fight for the interests of the rich at the top. But crucially, it's not just about a battle in the parliament and the council. It's about the streets, it's about the workplaces, it's about the schools, it's about the communities, it's about the colleges, it's about people power, it's about workers' power. That's our politics. Join with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that excellent contribution. So next up, we have a speaker who's come from the US. She's a member of Socialist Alternative there, and she's from Texas, where many of you will know one of the most.
And it's not enforced by the state. Instead, it's any anti-abortion vigilante out there can sue any person that's involved in this crime for a bounty of up to $10,000. So not only is the crafter of this law designed to embolden the most reactionary, misogynistic elements of society, but politicians from at least 7 other states have said that they want to pass similar bans of their own. So this all comes nearly 50 years after a mass women's movement forced our Supreme Court to recognize the right to an abortion. And now, in a country that does not guarantee paid family leave, or childcare, or healthcare, where the average cost of giving birth in a hospital in Texas is over $17,000, in a country where 73% of women who seek abortion say this because they can't afford a kid, there's a movement to criminalize the choice to not have a child. It could not be any clearer that this is an attack directed at working class women and families. This is working class women being turned away in the dozens from clinics that they've probably already driven hours to, getting down on their knees and begging to not be forced to give birth and being told that they're going to have to go out of state. It's working class families who have had to take out loans to afford to travel out of state, to miss work, to pay for childcare, to find lodging, and of course to pay for the medical care itself. And in fact, our Attorney General Ken Paxton, a high-ranking official in the state of Texas, said this is why the law was good, because it was stimulating interstate commerce. Yeah. The Democratic Party is really happy to promote ideas like bodily autonomy and the right to choose, even though they are the party currently in power and have completely failed to protect abortion rights. But to be very honest with you, in reality, I don't think that there is such a thing as bodily autonomy under capitalism. When we live at the disposal of our bosses to use us and exploit us, to squeeze us for every last drop of profit that we can give them, to wear us out and then toss us aside, what working class person can genuinely say we have control over our bodies and our lives? Because this is the reality, not just for women, but the whole working class who is continuously robbed of this basic dignity. And it is these same bosses and their representatives who are here in Glasgow deciding for us whether we can drink clean water, breathe clean air, have access to food, and be sheltered from natural disasters. Speaking of natural disasters, another story from Texas. In February, it got colder than it usually does, and our privately run electric grid froze over. There were 2 consecutive days of, the freeze lasted weeks, but there would be 2 consecutive days of below freezing temperatures and over 4 million people without power. At least 210 people died from the cold, but also from car crashes, carbon monoxide poisoning, if they couldn't go stay in a hotel and use their cars or stove to keep their families warm. The cold snap that caused this energy crisis is without a shred of a doubt going to happen again. But our politicians in Texas, they wear the fossil fuel capital of the world as a badge of honor. And they have done virtually nothing to hold their murderer friends in the energy sector accountable. But when you look at ordinary people, that is where you can actually see the deep desire for accountability and for justice. And when that finds expression in a working class organization, that is when we actually see stuff start to happen. We saw it today and this weekend, perfect. And we can see it in the strike wave in the US right now, where workers are fighting back against billionaire bosses at John Deere, at Kellogg, the billion-dollar entertainment industry for better pay and safe working conditions and humane working hours. We saw a glimpse of it when tens of thousands demonstrated across the US and internationally against the Texas abortion ban on October 2nd. And you've seen countless examples across the world of mass movements against gender violence. Hundreds coming out in outrage against the senseless murder of Sarah Everard and now Sabrina Leinster, the Neo Numeros movement, the victorious struggle to repeal the Age in Ireland, the heroic resistance to the abortion ban in Poland. It's countless. And these fights, this fight for our lives, for genuine bodily autonomy, to be safe in the streets, in our homes, in our workplaces, and on our own planet. This is fundamental to the fight for socialism. We can only make it a reality if for everyone with an international mass movement that bases itself in the power of the multiracial, multi-gender working class that can topple this rotten system, and only then will we have any genuine voice for working class.
Thank you, Grace. That was fantastic. We hope that those of you who were able to join us for the first time on today's demonstration have enjoyed the best possible introduction you could have had to what our organisation is all about. But now I have a video which I hope will give you a bit more of a flavour of what the day-to-day work of ISA is all about. So I'll play the video and then we'll continue the rally.
COVID-19 threw capitalism into unprecedented crisis. The inequality, poverty, and oppression that we already battled on a daily basis were dramatically exacerbated as the world entered a new era of turmoil. The lives of working class people the world over have been upended, bearing the brunt of the misery unleashed by the pandemic. But the class struggle did not wait, and neither did we. Over the last year and a half, International Socialist Alternative has been active in the movements and struggles of the working class, oppressed, and young people on every continent. We've stood shoulder to shoulder with workers in struggle and play an active role in rebuilding a fighting labour movement. We're waging a socialist feminist fight back against gender violence and sexism in all its forms. We're linking the struggle for LGBTQ+ liberation to the fight against capitalism. We've intervened in movements opposing imperialism, war, and racism. We fight for Marxist ideas within mass movements.
Los trabajadores, no solo de Matamoros,
As a threatened ruling class turns to increasingly repressive measures, our members have often been targeted. We've answered with bold solidarity campaigns, defending Socialist Council member Shama Sawan against big business and the right, building solidarity against repression in China and Hong Kong, International Socialist Alternative was established at a time when the need for a world party of revolutionary socialism became more apparent than ever. It's not been easy, but the time, energy and sacrifice of all our members has allowed us to take important steps forward, preparing us to seize opportunities in the explosive period ahead.
And if what the speakers who've already taken part in this rally have said resonates with you, because it makes sense. And if you're not yet a member of the ISA, International Socialist Alternative, I would say why not use the time that we have left here, listen to our final speakers, and consider what you might like to do about that. There will be a team of people after this rally who are situated at the main table just outside, who will be eager to talk to you about what joining ISA might mean, to answer questions that you might have. So please consider going and talking to them afterwards if you think that that might be for you. And on the subject of what all of us can do, today's rally and the tremendous intervention that we have been able to organise as an international, putting socialist ideas centre stage at the COP26 protest. Those interventions have cost our organisation a tremendous amount of money. We know that many of you have spent a lot of money just to be here today, and we understand that. But we don't have the backing of billionaires. And so it is still necessary for us to ask for the financial support and sacrifice of working class people, of young people, of our members, in order to continue and to develop our work. So even though we know many of you have already made financial sacrifices to be here, we will ask you again if you can give what you can to help support the work of International Socialist Alternative. We're going to pass around some things during the rally, and there'll probably be an opportunity for you to put the money in after the rally as well. So please have a look at what you've got. I won't make the cliche joke about silent collections being the best, but it is true that they are a bit less disruptive. So do consider if you have notes. They are particularly welcome. So moving on, we have an excellent speaker who is going to address you now. Caitlin Lee has very helpfully agreed to join us after a long day of demonstration. She's a services worker here in Glasgow, and she is a young trade union activist. She's the branch chair of Unite Glasgow Hospitality and Services, and she's helped me from key recruitment drives and also some important disputes within her union. So please welcome Caitlin Lee.
Living in Glasgow is absolutely influencing my belief in socialism and trade unionism. Glasgow is a city that industrially was decimated during Thatcher. This left working class people behind, and the implications can still be seen now. This was due to a government that didn't have workers as a priority, callously destroying working class areas and attempting to decimate the power of unions and their members. The abhorrent policies and shift that happened under Thatcher still has a grip on Scotland, parts of Scotland like Glasgow. When you look at the extortionate privately rented flats, privatised travel, and deep divisions within working class communities. Most recently, with the COVID pandemic, it again was working class people in precarious industries that were exploited, put in danger, and what we experienced in hospitality in 2020 was an industry of highly skilled workers again decimated. This was happening all the while multinational companies like Amazon, hotel chains, banks, and government ministers' crowds made literally billions, whereas the majority of hospitality workers would survive survived on less than minimum wage and didn't know if they had a job to go back to. This is why a just transition now for workers with the climate emergency is so important. We are facing what will be momentous changes to industries, and if all workers and trade unions aren't at the forefront demanding better, we simply won't get it. We need to demand that no worker should be branded low skilled in industries in order to justify the classist myth that we are less and should be paid poverty wages. Workers must demand better wages through their trade unions. Right now, in Glasgow, there are rescued workers all over Glasgow striking for better pay after being met with contempt from their employer and Glasgow City Council. If we as workers don't demand it, the bosses and the politicians won't act. This is why trade unions are so important to all industries and must be the leading force in creating the just transition. What a just transition needs to provide for working class people is no more jobs for added low skills, living wage, real living wage, an alternative politics to the elitism we have, and trade unions at the forefront of these demands. As a hospitality worker, we are consistently branded low skills, unfair minimum wages, exploited and harassed on our workplaces. But like me and so many other comrades, we have taken the fight back to the employer and are challenging this and organising. We have demands not just for our employer, but of our trade union movement as well. Without workers leading this change, it simply won't be possible. We are winning better wages, pay and conditions through the collective, and in an industry that was previously deemed unorganised and stupidly deemed unorganisable, we have some of the biggest wins in our trade union movement. Some of the wins that hospitality workers have had is overturning mass redundancies, having furlough backdated and topped up to 100%, taking a stand against misogyny and sexual harassment in our industry, and creating a national campaign demanding and successfully campaigning for 100% tips legislation, and building cross-branch solidarity with hospitality workers around the world. These hospitality workers are some of the lowest paid and most precarious zero-hour contract workers, standing up against the biggest hotel chains or event companies, and they're winning. What can start from fighting against an unfair redundancy can and has changed companies to adopt living wage. These successes and the strength of workers in hospitality shows that as a collective of workers, we can change industries and should have a seat at the table as we know our industry best and how to create positive change. This is how, as trade unionists, we as trade unionists should be making our union work for us by collectively demanding more. And I was kettled earlier and we were shouting, workers united will never be defeated, and I think we all need to remember that.
Thank you very much. And continuing on that theme, we have another worker, one of the workers who has been clapped and then slapped this year in the National Health Service. Amidst the global pandemic, NHS workers have been at the forefront in England, Wales and Scotland of treating the many victims both of coronavirus and of all of the related illnesses, so on, which the pressures that the service has been under. Hugh Caffrey is an active trade unionist in Unison, who works in the NHS, and he's also a leading member of the Trade Union Bureau of Socialist in England, Wales and Scotland. And I should say he's also a stalwart member of the International Socialist Centre. So please welcome Hugh.
Thanks a lot, time words. Well, you're making me blush. Okay. I do need to say I'm not speaking in the capacity as a healthcare worker, but I am speaking as a socialist and certainly as a member of the Health Workers Trade Union. And at the moment we are having a national ballot of the best part of 1 million workers across various health service unions, including the one of which I'm a member.
about whether we think 3% is enough. And I can tell you what, most workers don't. Most health workers don't, most workers in general don't. We've got prices going up at 5%, probably 10%. If you're not on a particularly good income, like most workers are not. And at the same time, we see the profits at the top piling up. And those profits are at the expense of wages, and those profits are at the expense of the planet. Because what is not spent in wages and what is gained by using the environment as a free resource is what the capitalist class live from. It's what their shareholders live from, and it's what their system is a machine about extracting from the lives and the bodies and the livelihoods of working people, and likewise from the planet. And that is why this system has piled up wealth at the top, it's piled up poverty at the bottom, and it's piled up climatic and environmental destruction across the planet. And that is why we're socialists, and that is why we're fighting against it. And there'll be many, many, many people this week that have made the point that COP26 is a conference of parties, but it's a conference of capitalist parties. It's a conference of hirelings of the employers. It's a conference of those who are part of the problem, not part of the solution. But it's also a conference of a very, very small number of people, because we're all at the capitalists own the wealth, we're all at the employers own the workplaces. As Caitlin's just pointed out, for every one of them, there's a million of us. It's working people that do all the work. It's working people that move things, make things, sell things, and so on and so forth. Without us, nothing gets done. And that's true in the health service, and it's true in the service sector, it's true in hospitality, it's true everywhere. That's what gives us power. That's what gives us power to fight for better workplace. Every struggle for a better workplace, for better pay, for better conditions, whatever it is, does raise questions about, well, who sets the agenda in this workplace? Is it the workers, or is it the shareholders? Is it the workers, or is it the government? And that's the power that we have on one level, but it goes further than that. Look at the selfishness of the big business politicians. Boris Johnson goes there, not in the interests of people anywhere, but to pick an argument with the French politicians. They go there to do the same thing with him. Why? Because they're squabbling about who shareholders in their country are going to screw over at the expense of the ordinary people across the planet. But that's what they do. What we do as ordinary people across the globe, we've got a vested interest in better wages, better public services, an end to violence against women, an end to an oppression, and the safeguarding of the planet. They're buying boat holes in New Zealand to live like hobbits or something if everything goes wrong. We can't do that. I don't want to do that if I could, but we can't do that. That's not an option for us. We are the class that looks at things that's not in a selfish way, that is about coming together. It's about coming together in the workplace as a trade union, as Caitlin was saying. It's about coming together as a movement, the climate strikes, as other people have been saying. We can go a lot further than that. We can come together in our millions, in our tens of millions, in our billions across the globe and build an alternative form of society that's based on solidarity, that's based on cooperation, that's based on taking everything that the unions are doing right now and everything that the climate strike movement is doing right now and bring it together as a new form of society. And that's why we're socialists. But it also starts right here, right now. Final point. Everybody will have seen those big balloons from the big national trade unions on the demonstration today. Those unions have got millions of people in it. And every single one of them has got a vested interest in being part of the climate strike movement. We all live on the same planet. We all suffer the same consequences. And our role is to bring those two movements together. We've seen Greta Thunberg go to the picket lines. We've seen the trade unions talking about a just transition at their conferences and in the workplace. We need to do everything that we can to bring that together in an active way, in joint strikes, in joint climate assemblies, in joint conferences of resistance. We do that to fight now, and we do that to prepare for the very different form of society that we can have and that the entire planet will benefit from, apart from Bojo and apart from princes with private jets. That's what we're fighting for. Join us in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have another in our great lineup of climate strikers, this time from Belgium. Mai is a student at the University of Ghent, and she was central to leading the climate strike in that city. More recently, she's also played a leading role in Rosa, the socialist feminist campaign in Belgium, along with active left students, an anti-capitalist student organisation that works closely with the ISA. Please welcome Mike.
Everybody hear me? Yeah. So in Belgium, a few weeks ago, a new climate strikes were announced. Our Flemish Minister of Education replied that was a really bad idea because it would mostly disadvantage the most vulnerable people who already lost a lot of lessons during COVID. We had the guts to say that after we announced a new round of budget cuts in our education system of 100 million euros. No surprise that young people, it's just like a direct attack on young people today, especially the most vulnerable ones. So it's no surprise that young people today have any confidence in politics. And that's as well the reason why they should believe in 2019 in the first place to take more radical action. And I think that the issue of climate for the issue of climate change is really clear that it's such a huge problem. And for the vast majority of activists, it's clear that it needs a global and a systematic solution. But by the fact that the crisis is so big, it can also lead to the idea that a lack of belief that a real change is possible. And I think Greta Thunberg does a really good point in pointing systematically out that sorry. I was going to be really certain. You don't need to work with it. So the Young Compromise is denouncing the fact that the agenda of politicians is mainly corporate driven. To give perspective for the movement and to undermine possible deception, we need to go further than just denouncing the system. We need to have a clear strategy on how we can take on the system to bring the other. And for this, we can draw lessons out of the 2019 movement, which in my entire life was one of the coolest experiences that we tried putting on every Thursday. So cool teachers were like encouraging us to do the lecture, to do the courses, and on the public transport, there was tried working to the classroom, and there was a real huge public support that we literally experienced in a very concrete way and gave us the confidence to really go much right on this way. And I think that the climate strike also affected in a very concrete way the workers' movement. For example, in February 2019, the Socialist trade union in Belgium announced a strike and a day of action for more purchasing costs. But workers being enthusiastic by climate strike pressured the leadership of the union to transform the day of action into a real strike. And of course, we organized solidarity visits with school strikes in the private sector. And this was really important because the union has tried everything to create a contradiction between the social movement and the climate movement. And I think the speaker before me explained very well why that's bullshit. So I'm going to go further into that. But they do this by putting anti-social climate measures in the agenda, for example, that's from polluting products, but as well by creating and trying to oppose jobs to sustainable production. And I want to go like to one example of how we try to handle that debate. A good example of that is that a big steel company, ArcelorMittal, who has a plant in my city. It belongs to the top of most polluting companies in Belgium and in Europe. Climate activists propose that that company invest out of its profit into sustainable production based on existing technology. And they got a reply that therefore the direct effect on the 6,000 jobs that are being popularly job provided to many different families. And I think that poses it was a very concrete question that we needed to answer. If the bosses are not willing to give, on the one hand, guarantee job rights, and on the other hand, sustainable production, you need to question private ownership of production. And workers should take for this ownership and run the company in function of the needs of society and nature. And it was a very concrete example we used in action plan policy to point out to secondary school students like who are our real allies. Because a secondary school student, he can leave the school, but he can have paralyzed production, and by this society as workers can do. And so that's why it's extremely important in the climate change movement start to build a socialist program that starts from daily struggles and the daily needs of people and a link of the general problem of capitalism towards a more just society, socialism. But how does a movement do that? How does a movement put its own program on the agenda? And it's by building a grassroots movement from below and introducing active and democratic discussion. And for that, we need to build up our own independent structure. This means action committees for schools, in colleges, in the workplace, in regional, on a national level. And it's really important today, after COP26, because we need to discuss what will be the next step. We need to discuss a plan of action. How are we going to build up to that? And the more people decide on the next steps of the movement, the better the movement is organized, the bigger will be the participation in action, the bigger we'll be able to maximize our potential. And I think so it's a big challenge for everyone, as mentioned before already. And going out and rebuilding this movement with more unity, with more strategy, with more program, with more tactics, right for research.
Thank you very much, guys. So our next speaker is one of the second of two locals we had on the platform. It's a pleasure to welcome Archie. He's a recent joiner of the International Socialist Alternative here in Glasgow. Previous speakers have spoken on the need for workers' action to demand retraining and investment, provide green jobs and radical climate action, reskilling the workforce to move away from fossil fuels. Our next speaker has had first-hand experience of this. He is a former fossil fuel industry worker himself, and he now works in renewables. So please welcome Archie McKellen.
Everyone, thanks for that kind of introduction. My name's Archie and I joined Socialist about a year ago. I live right here in Glasgow and I'd like to welcome you all here. I was hoping I wouldn't have to say anything about the weather, but so yeah. I worked as an industrial climber and abseiler and I've worked in many different industries across the world for the last 10 years. I used to climb oil rigs and worked in the North Sea, Singapore, pretty much everywhere in between. But recently I changed and I moved over to climbing wind turbines, mainly in Sweden right now, so I meet the comrades up there, which is great. And I feel that there is proof that you can do a just transition from fossil fuel work to green jobs. But I do fundamentally believe that this process is being slowed down by capitalists who place profit above the earth and its habits. I've not always been politically aware or active, but in recent years I started listening to podcasts which drew me in with discussing the books, films and culture, then slowly introduced Marxist ideas to me. It was a very sneaky trick, but one I'm glad they told. Yeah. So I started finding opinions and information that I hadn't encountered in my general consumption of mainstream media, heard about events in history that I hadn't been taught in school. One that really got my attention was the history of red cloud sites, which is local to here, and the working sites of the upper flood shipbuilders such as Jimmy Reed. And this sort of led me with this, so this made me think about my current work situation where I work contract with no benefits and no trade unions. It's a very unfortunate situation. And I thought about how the best countries I've ever worked in always had the strongest unions. I thought about how I worked the hardest in the most dangerous conditions for the least money when I had least experience and it was easiest to practice. All these thoughts led me to socialism. Armed with this knowledge and perspective, I look back on my working life. I remember watching Bangladesh's capitalists and fighting the deportation in the dry docks of Singapore for doing stuff like taking water out of bridges that were set aside for horses. I thought about the plight and business of Australians setting out big gold mines that used to be their land, how we were tearing it up for metal. Throughout all the world and all my working experiences, all I can think of was the exploitation that is capitalism and how the system enables it. I have very little trust in our current fiscal institutions' ability to deliver the necessary green revolution. There's so much pressure from capitalists to keep away any change so that profits are maintained. But if you're in the tea shack and you go, people know what's coming. They know that they have to make a green transition. It still can be transferred out of the climate. You know, I can find wind turbines. Welders can work on wind turbines. Crane ops can work on wind turbines. So they're scared their wages are going to be terrible. The unions are bad, and they're paralyzed with fear, to be honest. Oil companies are also incredibly powerful, but are scared by the changing opinions of the public, because they know the power of the public and of the working class. I remember a really absurd scene that sort of can give you an idea of this. I was on a rigging, you can imagine how filthy and dirty that is. And they started greenwashing and they put recycling bins all over. And the campaign was called, and I'm not lying, it's called Green Rigs. Yeah. And it shows that these companies will do anything they can in their power to muddy the water, to slow down things, confuse people, and they'll lie and they'll tell all sorts of stories about how the renewables is no good and all this. And I think that the best way we can fight this is through the working class asserting its power and showing the radical things that's needed and is possible and most importantly needed. So I'm just going to give a wee bit of chat about Glasgow local history. I hope no one's close to that, but I just remember I mentioned earlier Jimmy Reed and they attempted to keep shipbuilding jobs. And as a previous speaker mentioned, this was unfortunately not successful, which led to terrible deindustrialization in Glasgow and the poverty. And now Glasgow is the centre of world attention, and I only worked with some of these media types. One of the speeches given by Jimmy Reed called Alienation. He gave it to the Glasgow University students on their graduation, and he's warning them about the life that capitalism holds for them and the rat race that you can fall into. And to be honest, I fell into it myself. And the final part is something I'd like to quote. He said, "A rat race is for rats, and we are not rats. We are human beings, rejecting insidious pressures in society that would want a physical facility to all that is happening around you, that would constantly silence the face of injustice, lest you jeopardize the chance of promotion and self-advancement. That is how it starts. And before you know where you are, you're a fully paid-up member of the rat race. The fight is too high. It entails the loss of the dignity of the human spirit." His message rang true then, and it rang true now. I hope we can all avoid the risks of the rat race and move forward to a socialist future. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you, Archie, and thank you to both our Glasgow speakers for the very warm welcome that we've received here. I know that many of you here will be eagerly anticipating and hoping to hear from Sharma Sawant, and she has hoped to join us via video link today. She sends her solidarity for this meeting, but unfortunately the immense pressures that have been generated by a right-wing billionaire-backed recall campaign mobilised against her means that she can't be here today. The campaign she is facing is an attempt to oust a strong socialist voice who helped lead, as many of you will remember, the campaign and the successful campaign, I should say, for a $15 an hour minimum wage, making Seattle one of the first cities to implement it. She's being ousted she's not being ousted, we hope, but there's a movement to try and oust her on the pretext of her role in the Black Lives Matter protest. So I think that we should be very grateful that she's taken the time to send us a message of solidarity and sympathetic to her not being able to make it. But I think it's really important that everybody here sends our own message back of solidarity and support from everyone gathered here for Sharma and for the fight that she is waging and leading against this awful weekly campaign. So please join me in sending that message now. So, moving on to our next speaker, world headlines have dominated, the headlines that have dominated the world over the last few weeks have been those of the new Cold War, of attacks on China from the US and other capitalists for expanding coal power, of flash floods, of extreme weather events which have rocked China and Hong Kong and Taiwan as well, and also of serious inaction from the ruling dictatorship, the CCP dictatorship. It's the job of socialists and of internationalists to show solidarity with those who are in struggle around the world. And that is perhaps especially the case when those who are waging those fights are facing some of the most brutal repression and some of the most iron dictatorships. Our next speaker is a representative of the Solidarity Against Repression in China and Hong Kong campaign. I would ask that everybody here respects that comrade's security while he takes part in this rally. Please do not take any videos or photos of him, and please be aware of those security risks and bear them in mind. So I'd like to welcome Ken Lee, who is going to speak to us now from Solidarity Against Repression in China and Hong Kong.
When you stop the live stream, the link is gone.
Comrades, as if the climate crisis wasn't bad enough, the two superpowers, the US and China, have now weaponized this issue. They are battling for dominance over the 21st century in a new Cold War between the two most powerful capitalist states for resources and the opportunity to exploit working people across the world. We, the working class, should not put any trust in either side. The actions and policies of the US and China in the climate crisis have become a new battleground. It is all about pressure, gaining advantages for their own capitalists and weakening the other side. This will result in even bigger obstacles and further reduce any possibility to cooperate for a solution to the climate crisis. The deal on the table at this COP26 has never been so empty. The capitalists and the global media will try to brainwash people that the world leaders have come up with a plan, but there is no plan. What does this mean for the planet? It means that China is the biggest climate destroyer, accounting for 27% of global emissions. The US is second on 11%. So clearly, without these two, there can be no solution. And yet, the US is spending billions of dollars in overseas subsidies for oil and gas. This is for their battles of influence over the neo-colonial world. And hundreds of new coal power plants are being built across China right now. So all we get is empty promises from Biden and Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping did not even come to COP26. He's too afraid to face criticism of China's coal boom. Biden has used Xi's absence to attack China in the Cold War. But Biden is on track to pass more oil and gas drilling permits this year than any year under Trump. Far from offering solutions, it is capitalism and especially the two superpowers that are the problem. The solution is to end their system. Chinese capitalism is fundamentally tied to coal. It fuels the domestic GDP growth and generates billions of dollars in profits for China's energy capitalists, who are closely tied to the so-called communist dictatorship. The entirety of the CCP has invested too much in coal so that the idea of shifting away to renewables faces fierce resistance within their system. China has made huge green energy investments, more than any other country, but unfortunately, these are largely decorative or even just using fake data to allow Xi Jinping to boost himself on the world stage. The renewables are often not used because this will hurt the profits and power of the Chinese fossil fuel class capitalists. At the same time, air pollution kills 4,000 people every day in China. There's now a coal crunch in China, with the worst power cuts this century facing working people, including in the freezing Northeast. Because China's economy has not transitioned away from coal. The CCP is in fact enforced to double down, to get more coal, more mines opening, and even more coal imports. This is happening right now while we are here in Glasgow, because the dictatorship fears massive political unrest and economic losses. One of Xi Jinping's promises before COP26 is that China will stop building coal power plants overseas through its worldwide Belt and Road Initiative. This is not out of the goodness of its heart for the sake of the climate. China actually stopped funding these projects a few years ago. The real reason is the growing debt crisis building up among Belt and Road countries. It's bad business, in other words. For the CCP dictatorship, climate activism, and any kind of criticism, protest, or organization will be crushed. Without democratic rights, the mass struggle to fight for system change in China is viciously suppressed. Documentaries about pollution are banned, environmental NGOs are banned. If Greta Thunberg was in China, she'd be arrested for subversion of the regime. And indeed, there's a student climate activist, Howie O, who is threatened by school authorities and the police. The crisis of global capitalism has never been so acute. There are coming social explosions in China, and as much as the regime wants to suppress it, the masses are moving into struggle. This is why ISA has launched our campaign, Solidarity Against Repression, in China and Hong Kong. This is the only international campaign linked to socialist organizing on the ground in Hong Kong and China. And this is the only campaign truly independent of either US or Chinese imperialism. Our comrades in China and Hong Kong have to work underground, and some have to go into exile due to repression. Please support our campaign by joining us and donating to us. You can get more info on the website chinaworker.info and on the ISA website internationalsocialist.net. History proves that dictatorship has always ended in revolution. The fight for democratic rights is not just something for China or Hong Kong, but for Scotland, the UK, and the whole world. Because even in so-called democratic capitalist countries, all the important decisions are taken by the billionaire elite, and we, the majority, have no power. We're building the forces of Marxism in China and in the rest of the world. Join us in the fight for a new system of democratic socialism based on the power of the international working class to extinguish capitalism and imperialism in both the US and China.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, our final speaker is not able to be with us in person. And as all of us know, access to the events around COP have been very unequal, and especially for people from the neo-colonial world, it's been much more difficult to be here with us. This comrade is a member of the ISA from South Africa, and they have had problems, unfortunately, with travel. He's an active trade unionist, an organizer with the General Industry Workers Union of South Africa, and he has been able to join us via the video link. So please welcome Ndamizo Mahube.
Socialism is the only solution for the climate catastrophe. Climate change is a reality, and while business leaders ignore warnings from scientists, people across the world are already suffering the effects of climate change. Time is running out, and we need a socialist alternative desperately. We must fight against those who sacrifice the health of the planet and the security of its people in the name of profit. Resultantly, the only hope for humanity is to overthrow the capitalist system. It is not possible to deny that capitalist enterprise is responsible for the destruction of the natural environments globally. In South America, the Amazon rainforest is under attack. Already, 20% of Amazon rainforest has been lost to deforestation. Simultaneously, the tropical forests in the Congo Basin, which are the second largest in the world and the largest in Africa, are also in danger. Estimates suggest that deforestation in Africa is taking place at 4 times the pace of the global average, and this is while more than 2/3 of the people in sub-Saharan Africa rely on natural forests for food, fuel, and for their livelihoods. Additionally, the widespread deforestation leads to high levels of carbon in the atmosphere, leading to high temperatures, rising sea levels, and extreme weather. The effects of rising global temperatures are visible and alarming. Polar ice caps are melting and breaking apart, and this will cause floods that will displace millions. The Gulf Stream, which transports 20% of the heat that accumulates at the equator towards the polar regions in the northern hemisphere and regulates weather patterns, is also collapsing. Undoubtedly, curbing deforestation is a vital task facing us in this decade. Deforestation, however, only accounts for a portion of the issue. Ocean life serves as a food source to many fishing communities, but it is being depleted rapidly due to overfishing and pollution. Mining, a legacy of colonial extraction in Africa, continues to add immensely to the environmental degradation. For example, since oil mining began in Bayelsa State in 1956 in Nigeria, reckless mining activities in the region have caused extensive and long-lasting air, soil, and water contamination. Additionally, one of the most diverse ecosystems in Africa has been lost. 2 million people in Bayelsa State are facing hunger because most of the farmland is no longer arable, and rivers can no longer support healthy fish populations. Gas flares produced in the mining process pollute the air and cause acid rain. Diseases such as Alzheimer's and cancer are common, and subsequently accumulates at the equator towards the polar regions in the northern hemisphere and regulates weather patterns, is also collapsing. Undoubtedly, curbing deforestation is a vital task facing us in this decade. Deforestation, however, only accounts for a portion of the issue. Ocean life serves as a food source to many fishing communities, but it is being depleted rapidly due to overfishing and pollution. Mining, a legacy of colonial extraction in Africa, continues to add immensely to the environmental degradation. For example, since oil mining began in Bayelsa State in 1956 in Nigeria, reckless mining activities in the region have caused extensive and long-lasting air, soil, and water contamination. Additionally, one of the most diverse ecosystems in Africa has been lost. 2 million people in Bayelsa State are facing hunger because most of the farmland is no longer arable, and rivers can no longer support healthy fish populations. Gas flares produced in the mining process pollute the air and cause acid rain. Diseases such as Alzheimer's and cancer are common, and subsequently, life expectancy is low and infant mortality is very high in the region. Indigenous communities and cultures are constantly under threat as governments and the extractive corporations they serve rob them of their land and livelihood. Moreover, the effects of air pollution, radiation, lead poisoning, and other toxic outputs of the mining industry have gone unaddressed. Many young people acknowledge that South Africa is one of the biggest polluters in the world, and young people are demanding change. South Africa is one of the top 5 coal exporters and one of the top 7 coal producers in the world. Importantly, the impact of mining on the natural environment is radicalizing many young people in South Africa, and the call for renewable energy is growing. In September, hundreds of protesters took to the streets in Cape Town and in Tshwane, calling for an end to harmful mining activities. The protest in South Africa took place as climate justice protests took place across the world over the month of September, showing that international solidarity for climate justice is growing. And as activists from across the world attend protest actions at COP26, we need to forge strong bonds of solidarity within the movement. The international socialist alternative is growing, and we must continue uniting forces of revolutionary Marxism, bringing them together in the fight for climate justice. Climate change presents a series of challenges for the working class that green capitalism cannot solve. Only a united working class held together by a revolutionary socialist program can be victorious in this monumental fight.
So just before I close tonight's rally, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. So please bear with me one second while I just do these. So first of all, this is an announcement to people who are getting a coach with us back to Edinburgh tonight. So comrades need to go to the station for either coach B or the 29-seater coach. So comrades who know that they're on those coaches, you need to go to the station at 8. If you're on coach A, it's 9. And I should also say that comrades who need COVID tests, please see liaison with the Connor or Matt at the end of the rally if they need help with that. And another housekeeping announcement, apologies, is just that there are any comrades here who have any money which has been raised either today or yesterday who haven't yet been able to pay in either fighting funds or paper sales. If you could see the need from the Irish section at the end of this rally, please, you'll be able to help with that. So those were housekeeping announcements. Things work properly. There we go. So thank you, and I think that tonight's rally has been an incredible ending to an incredible day. We have heard about struggles by workers and young people from Scotland to the US, from Belgium to Brazil. And we have also heard about how fighting for real system change means fighting against the capitalist system and fighting for the socialist alternative. The only way of fighting for a truly just transition is by fighting for socialism. That means fighting for public ownership of energy and transport as a first step. This could allow us to retool factories, to reskill workers, to rapidly eliminate the use of fossil fuels for energy. Meanwhile, we would be able to protect every existing job and at the same time create millions of new ones, of good jobs, unionised jobs. It means nationalising the banks so that we can put a stop to the huge sums of money that are being poured into dirty and polluting industries every single day through speculative investment and the like. Redirecting that wealth to create decent, well-paid green jobs instead. It means in place of the chaos of the market, putting workers in control, in their workplaces, in their communities, and in society as a whole. It means socialist planning for the planet. And of course, that can't happen in one country alone. We need an international plan for what is produced and for how it is distributed. We need a plan that recognises the injustice of imperialism and colonialism, that can end the tyranny of the big landowners, that will respect the rights of indigenous people and allow the restoration of the Earth's essential carbon sink, our trees and our seas. A socialist plan that will base itself on the democracy and self-governance of working class people, whose instinctive solidarity, as we've seen a glimpse of tonight, transcends borders. And that's in sharp contrast with the squabbling over markets and resources that passes for capitalist diplomacy, especially in this new era of a new Cold War. And we have also heard about the key force in society capable of transforming our world along these lines, about the mighty potential power of working class people when organised and united. And we've seen a bit of this with the strike action that took place here in Glasgow during the COP26. The strike action of refuse workers, but also the rail workers who won a victory in this city against their employer using only the threat of strike action without even needing to actually strike. We've heard also about the crucial importance of ideas, about the need for workers not just to organise industrially, but politically, about the subjective factor, the role that organised socialist parties and organisations like our own can play, even when still small. Just look at Seattle and the part played by Sharma. Maybe look at Cork and the excellent work being done by Mick that we heard from tonight. But more than that, look at the excellent work being done by ISA members and branches, influencing campaigns, leading workers' struggles, acting as a small cog in the big wheel. And I think it's been particularly inspiring to hear from a young generation of activists who have been at the forefront, particularly of this tremendous fight against climate change. Finally, and most importantly, we have heard about the urgency of the situation we face. That means that this historic meeting must act as a call to arms for every one of us. The gravity of this situation demands that each of us ask to ourselves, what role is it that we can play in the fight to change society, in the fight for socialism? It demands that we are prepared to make sacrifices, to dedicate our time and our energy, to contribute financially to the struggle to change society. So I'll leave each one of you with a question. Beyond today, what more can you do to help the fight for socialist change, the change you know is needed? If you have not yet joined ISA, can you commit to take that step today? If so, please speak to one of our organisers on the main table outside on your way out. And if you are already a member, when you go back to your town or city, can you take a step up? Can you do more in your branch? Can you take on a new role or responsibility? Can you increase your financial contribution to our organisation? Today's demonstration and today's rally mark a moment of great hope. It is, like I say, a bit of a glimmer of what's possible, a small window, we hope, into a great future. But now we must use this as a call to arms and fight to play our own small part in helping to usher in a socialist future, the future that we need. Thank you, comrades.
Socialist world is possible. Socialist world is possible. Socialist world is possible. Socialist world is possible.